Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Demco Premier Series above bed base rail kit for your fifth wheel with custom installation kit to make it fit your 2018 Ram 3500. Having these rails in your bed allows you to hook up to a bunch of different above bed fifth wheels, and it's going to be pretty standard across the board as far as all your different brands that are going to be able to work with this. So if you have a B&W like our neighbor has today, or a Curt, a Draw-Tite, Hidden Hitch, Husky, Reese, or Valley, they're all going to work with this standard size rail. Now it's pretty standard. You just have two rails that are pretty universal, and then they go into the custom kit, which allows you to bolt it up to your vehicle. And overall, it's not terribly hard. It's basically one of those jobs where you want to make sure that you measure and drill once. So it's not terribly hard to do. Once you're under the vehicle, you will probably have some weld nuts that need a little bit of cleaning out, just to kind of make those bolts pass in a little bit more. But overall, you should be able to knock this out within a few hours, and you'll be ready to put your fifth wheel hitch in and start towing. Now, the first thing you're going to want to determine is figure out if you have a short bed or a long bed. So ours is going to be the short one. So using the dimensions that are found in the instruction manual, we're going to measure this out. And this one puts us at 28 3/4. Now you're not measuring to the edge, you're going to be going to the center. So we'll go ahead, I'm going to get 3 different measurements. That way I can make sure it's nice and square. We're also going to measure from the side here. And then once we have our spot kind of determined where we want, I have a chalk marker, you can use a paint marker, whatever works best. And then we're going to be using these inside holes here, so we'll be marking those. Double check your instructions, and also if you have a bed liner, you got to realize that that does add just a little bit here, so you can account for that just by measuring back kind of right where the end of the bed box is. So I'm going to center up my paint marker. I use a chalk marker, that way if you do make a mark that you're not happy with, it actually comes off, but paint marker is going to work fine. This is just going to show us exactly where we need to be drilling. Now we're going to be drilling this out. I'm going to use a pilot drill just kind of get it started, and then I'm going to be using just a step bit here that's large enough to make sure that we pass our carriage bolts through. So I suggest having this handy, that way you can kind of test fit to make sure that it's going to feed through. So we'll go ahead and get our first hole drilled. Coming back with a step bit, I'll just go ahead and enlarge this and then test fit this once we feel that we have a large enough diameter. So we got this one to fit perfectly. I'll go ahead and repeat on the other side. So now just go ahead and vacuum up all your shavings, and I'm also going to come back with a little bit of clear spray paint. It's just a clear coat, and that's just going to have any of that raw edge protected from rust and corrosion later on. So now at this point we'll take our rail and we're just going to drop our hardware into place, make sure it's all nice and lined up. And then at this point, you're going to want to grab your fifth wheel. If you have the one that you're going to be using, that is obviously ideal. It's going to give it that nice custom fit exactly to yours. They're all kind of standard, but with a little bit of tolerance differences, just with powder coat and things like that, it's best to have the fifth wheel that you have ready. So I'm going to go ahead and get ours lifted up, and we'll get our front rail kind of in place, drop it in, and that's going to give us the next marks for the front rail. Now we have our fifth wheel in place. I've gone ahead and just kind of double checked all my measurements so it's nice and square. And something that I did on the front rail, which I'm going to do here on the rear, is on the corners I just kind of made just a little 90-degree mark, just kind of outlining it. That way I know that the rail, if it moves a little bit, I can put it right back where we need to go. So I'll make sure to do that on this one. And also we're going to be drilling through just like we did on the other one previously, but it is going to be a different hole. So we're going to be using the one further away from what we just did, so it should be the third one from the outside. So we'll go ahead and make our mark here, and we'll do that on the other side as well. So we're going to repeat the same process we did on the front. Now this one's right kind of on this corner, so just make sure it's not walking on you. And we are going to be drilling all the way down through the half channel. So you might want to extend your bit out as far as you can or get a long drill bit. So we're going to drill through this, and then we should be able to kind of reach down and feel that half channel as we're drilling. So with that hole made, as I push this down, I can feel that half channel. We're going to be drilling through that as well, so just keep your bit nice and squared up and go ahead and drill through that as well. So now we'll go ahead and enlarge this hole. Now as far as that half channel, we'll be able to enlarge that once we're kind of underneath. As long as we have a hole drilled through there, that's no big deal. But we'll enlarge this large enough to get our hardware passed through. Give ourselves a little bit of extra working room underneath here. I went ahead and took down the spare tire. I'm also going to remove the heat shield as well. Now these are just, you have 3 10mm bolts. There's also going to be 2 that kind of go into this little frame over here, so just make sure you get all of those. So now we'll just go ahead and set this aside for later reinstallation. So now while we're under here, we can see where we drilled through that half channel, so just make sure you have that hole going through. And there's 2 options here. You can use a step bit like I'm going to be using, or you can use a 1-inch hole saw. Either way, we're just making space for this to slide up. Now, the hole we have drilled out, just make sure it's nice and centered up. You should be able to look up and see that hole and just drill accordingly. Have this ready to kind of test fit up in there. Now you can see I have another hole here. When I drilled through, it kind of went at an angle. I wasn't super happy with it. Now one of the struggles I'm kind of running into is this hole was already previously here, so it's going to kind of want to walk this way. So just try to make this hole nice and centered up where you had that hole drilled through. So we have our hole drilled out here, and it does take a little bit, so just be patient. And obviously you're going to have hot metal falling down, so wear your safety glasses. But what we're looking for is this to pass through. Now I'm going to go ahead and also get some of that clear coat spray paint on here just to kind of prevent that raw metal from rusting. Now on the driver's side, it's going to be a little bit different. Now this one is a little bit tucked more back up, and you do have the fuel tank kind of in the way, as well as some lines. Now the lines are on some clips that you can move. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Again, you do have some clips here that you can move these. If you need to, you can zip tie these out of the way, but you obviously don't want to catch these on any of the bits or the drill as you're drilling away. So we have all of our holes drilled out. We're going to get the hardware back in place. So if you had those carriage bolts just kind of going in there, pop those back out, because we're going to put these spacers, and that's just going to make sure that when we tighten this down, it's going to have something nice and tight. It's not going to pull that bed up. It's just going to kind of keep that metal from distorting. So what we'll do here, we'll see if we can't use 2 of these. And towards the back, we can get away with using these shorter carriage bolts. Now, with the kit, it kind of has universal hardware as well as the custom hardware to fit your vehicle. So they have hex head bolts. I'm going to go ahead and use the carriage bolts. Kind of just makes more sense to me because you do have these square holes here. So let's go ahead. We'll get this dropped in, and then we're going to run this little spacer underneath here. And if it creates too much if it bumps it up too much, it's not sitting flush, then we can always take a spacer or a washer out. But it looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And it does look like there's a little bit of wiggle here. So I think if I take one of these washers out on each side, that should be better. And we're going to be doing this for the back side as well. But we are going to be using the longer carriage bolts. So make sure you have these, because we'll be sliding the collars over these once we get underneath. Now we're underneath, we have our stud kind of poking down here, and we're going to grab our brackets. They're nice and labeled out as to where they're going to go, and it's just going to kind of slide up here. And with our bolts that come with the kit, these are going to go in the weld nuts. Now, as you see, these have seen better days. We live in the Midwest here, so all that salt and buildup in those holes can cause it to be a little bit tricky to get the hardware through, and you're going to want those cleared out before you just put them or try to get them started in. So what I've done is I soak them with some penetrating oil. I also clean them out with a tube brush here, and that kind of helped. But what I ended up doing was actually grabbing a bolt that's the same pitch and size, and I made some notches here to basically be a homemade tap. Now, if you have a tap, you can also use that to just kind of go through and clean these out. But once you're able to kind of pass this in and out through all the holes, then you should be ready to put your hardware in place. Now, there are going to be 2 on this side as well as 2 up front, and then that's going to be the same on the other side. So make sure you get those all ready to go before you start trying to put your brackets up. So we'll go ahead and get our bracket, and I'll just start my bolts here on those factory weld nuts. And I've also put my split washer and flat washer on these as well, so make sure you do that. And there are a few spacers that come in the kit. They're not really specific, as you probably see looking in the instructions, and I'd like to put something in here, kind of keep this corrugation from really damaging itself. So what I might do here, it seems like it's going to be a little bit too small of a gap to use the open design here. This one's a little bit thicker. So I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these spacers and just kind of put this in place, and that's going to disperse the weight once this is kind of tightened down. So I'll just kind of drop this out of the way real quick. And yours may have a different tolerance, but this seems to work pretty well for ours. So get this raised up. Now, I'm not going to tighten these down all the way. You do kind of want that to just kind of cinch that up a little bit. And then where we have our carriage bolt passing down here, we're just going to go ahead and take our flange nut and we'll get that started here. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the passenger side. Now, on the driver's side, to mount this bracket up can get a little bit tricky because we have all these wires here. I mentioned you can undo them here, but also some of these, like the large wire loom harness, plugs into the frame with the plastic clip. And make sure when you're tightening this down, you're not crushing anything, but also unplugging it or taking it out of the frame makes it a lot easier to kind of just move this out of the way. So make sure you do that before tightening it down. Now we're up on the front on our passenger side, as you can see, and where we drilled out that 1-inch hole, you're going to take your spacer and that should slide up. Now, it may not go up all the way, and especially if it's not perfectly centered, you may struggle to kind of get this up there. You can knock this up there with a dead blow to kind of get it started, but once you kind of get this plate in place, you'll be able to draw it up a little bit using this flange nut when you tighten it up. So I went ahead, I put up my spacer in, I put another one of those spacer blocks here, and then I kind of drew this up, and that kind of helped align these holes. I also put one of our spacer blocks up here. There is a large gap between the frame and the bracket, so this slid in there perfectly, and I went ahead and just tightened those down. So now that we have all of our hardware in place, we're just going to go back with our torque wrench and torque these down to the specifications found in the instruction manual. Now keep in mind, these smaller bolts here are going to be a different torque setting than the larger ones, so just adjust accordingly. And then we'll just go through to each of our hardware and torque them down. Now once you have everything torqued down properly, you're ready to put your heat shield back up as well as your spare tire. Now I do recommend going up there and checking to make sure that your fifth wheel is able to kind of slide in and out a little bit of that. You don't want it bound up, and if that's the case, you might have to loosen those brackets up a little bit and then retighten accordingly. That way it's not locked into those rails. And that was a look and installation of the Demco above bed rail kit for your 2018 Ram 3500.